Tom, thanks so much for joining me on the Social Impact Journal.
It's very good to be here, Jack. Thanks for having me on.
Amazing. So I think we're going to be talking a lot about OnPurpose today, but before we get into that, I would love to know, as I ask the majority of my guests, how did you get into this space? How did you, really feel like you wanted to play a role in this kind of social entrepreneurship scene?
Sure. Thanks, Jack. Happy to tell you that story. Probably the best place for me to start is I was doing some research. I was finishing a PhD. I'd initially thought I would become maybe an academic or a teacher. That's what the backgrounds of many of the people in my family were. And I discovered really that although in many ways I enjoyed academia, it probably wasn't quite for me. And so the next thing on my list then was really to want to do something that was socially useful. And I think like a lot of people in maybe about that age, I was thinking, international development was what I wanted to work in. And I kind of was very conscious that, it's not easy to get a job or even an internship in, say, one of the big international development agencies. And even if I did manage to do that, the kind of training and development that I might be able to get there might be quite difficult. I was aware you could end up doing internships for quite a long time. And at the same time, I had a conversation with a friend whose brother had actually gone into accountancy and then quite quickly done some very interesting things in the kind of international development space. And so that switched on a light for me, which is, acquiring some commercial, some business skills, understanding how the private sector works might actually be very helpful and might be a good way for me to acquire some experience that then I can use at the time in the international development space. So long story short, I went into management consultancy. Maybe like a lot of people stayed a little bit longer than I thought. So rather than 2 to 3 years, it was about 5 in the end. And I guess I became, maybe you could say, sufficiently brainwashed that I was interested in how can I apply commercial business market dynamics, if you like, to solving social problems. And I also realized that trying to do this in international development when I had never lived a significant proportion of my life and probably didn't want to live a significant proportion of my life in, a developing country, was maybe not the best, place I could be. But that actually trying to understand how our economy works and make a difference by integrating in more intelligent ways, social and commercial or commercial and environmental ways of working, was something that I could do in the UK. And it felt like, well, actually, I did now have some experience and some skills that I could bring to bear on that. So when I was leaving McKinsey, the management consultancy I was working for, I guess I'd slightly changed tack and I was looking explicitly for places where I could mix or integrate social and commercial ways of working. That was kind of the first step.
Right, but as I know it, you studied your PhD in biophysics and molecular biology at Cambridge. So when you came out of that and you were looking at the international development space, I kind of want to understand your thought process there.
Yeah, that's a very good question, and not, as all good questions are, not that easy to answer. I'd probably have to say there is something in, from quite a long way back, whether that's in my upbringing, in my values or whatever, that, I wanted to be making a difference. I didn't want to simply be making money or helping other people make money. And, where exactly that comes from, I think is quite difficult to define, but I'd have to point to my upbringing, my family, my values, the people, who I was friends with and the circles I moved in. So that was clearly important to me. International development, probably then specifically because maybe that was kind of seen as, the biggest need or particularly difficult or whatever. There was maybe an element of challenge in there. But as I said, I think in a way that particular focus was maybe a little bit misplaced for me, given, my background, my experience and so on. I ended up in a place in the end where I felt, well, actually, it's probably better to try and make a difference in the place that I do live in and have experience of and know more about.
Yeah, for sure. And when you left McKinsey and you were looking for that place where you can combine social and commercial, what did you find? Was there many opportunities out there for you to deploy those skills?
Yeah, so I ended up working in a couple of places and enjoyed both of them hugely. And I'd say I think I also realized that there were not that many people who could do that. There were not many people around who had experience, not that I had it at that point, but I was aiming to get it, had experience of both working in a commercial environment and working in a social or an impact environment. So that in itself was quite interesting. And it meant, I think, that certain organizations, certain charities, social enterprises were switched on to that. Quite a lot of them culturally were maybe, not so much, and were maybe skeptical, maybe even suspicious of people who might come from a different sector. But, long story short, I ended up doing two things for about a couple of years. One was very exciting, working at Comic Relief, which is in the UK is a big household name charity, and does lots of amazing things. But behind the scenes is actually quite commercial and has quite a lot of commercial partnerships, and that was of interest. And I ended up being able to work with some of the senior people there on various, portfolio projects, as it were, wherever my skills and abilities and background was helpful. And that was fun and exciting. And actually through that came in contact with an organization called RED, which some of your listeners might be familiar with or might have heard of. It was founded by Bono and Bobby Shriver and was set up to generate revenues, generate funds to fight HIV/AIDS in Africa by channeling money from big corporates who would make available certain products, of which a percentage of what they make would go to the global fund. We funnel to the global fund, which would then employ it to fight HIV/AIDS in Africa. So again, very much a kind of crossover of both working in the commercial in that particular example corporate world, understanding that, etc., and then trying to have a social impact with that.
Yeah, for sure. So when did the idea for OnPurpose come to you?
Yeah, so interestingly, actually, whilst I was leaving McKinsey, so before I went into either of those two jobs, I helped someone think about and put together a little business plan for what essentially was a graduate training program for people who wanted to work in charities. And given my kind of path, I guess I was interested in that because I thought, well, if that had been around when I was leaving university, I might have chosen that because it would have maybe overcome some of those concerns around development and where would a career in charity go, and et cetera. So I was helping someone else on that project, and in the course of that was interviewing a range of people. And one lady I interviewed who actually several years later became one of our OnPurpose board members. We were having this very exciting conversation about, needing more people who, as I sometimes call it, are bilingual, who can speak the commercial and the social and environmental languages and who can straddle that divide. And I remember very clearly, she said to me, actually, rather than a graduate training program for people who want to work in charities, you should create the leadership program for this new space. And that idea stuck with me. And that particular project was too far down the lines to kind of reopen, what it might be in the scope. But the idea, and I went away and did these other two jobs for a couple of years, but the idea kind of kept going around my head. And although I'd never thought or assumed that I would ever start something up, but I didn't think of myself as a founder, I did eventually kind of start going, if I don't think about this and maybe see whether I could make it happen, I might always wonder what might have been if I tried. So, in the end, I remember it was over one Christmas holiday, I wrote in maybe classic management consultancy style, a very long PowerPoint deck, which is the business plan for OnPurpose, and started essentially talking to lots of people about it alongside, the work I was still doing.
Amazing. So a few months ago, I interviewed an amazing social entrepreneur called Camilla Marcus too, who I know is an OnPurpose fellow and actually talked about it on the podcast. And this was one of the reasons I was really excited for this episode. So I know there's so many amazing social entrepreneurs and change makers that have come through the program. So after that Christmas, you've written the pitch deck and you get into the new year. I'd always so fascinated about the first steps that entrepreneurs take in how do you get this off the ground? How do you get to that first cohort for those associates, those individuals that will be part of the program? Were you on your own? Did you bring co-founders in? Who did you turn to for advice?
Sure, thank you. So interesting, the first thing I did was, alongside my job, I started meeting lots of people, and in a way, a long PowerPoint deck as a business plan is probably not that helpful in terms of knowing what you're actually going to do, but it is helpful in terms of being able to send to someone and saying, I'd quite like to have a conversation with you about this. And so, I'd say almost most days, I'd be meeting someone before work or after work to kind of have a chat and get some feedback and talk through this idea. And I found that lots of people recognized the value of what I was trying to do. Lots of people also thought, by the way, that it would be very difficult to make happen, / maybe impossible to make happen. This was still the time of having unpaid internships, MBA summer programs, all this kind of stuff. And they said, well, the idea that I had some similarities to those setups, and it wasn't clear that people would go for what I was trying to do. But I often say that in the end, it goes back to this feeling that I didn't think of myself as a natural founder. I didn't think I was going to set something up, and I was maybe quite concerned about the risks and so on. But in the end, I often say, I talked to so many people that it would have been too embarrassing not to at least try. So I did, and essentially do that. And what I did was I said to myself, well, in fact, what I was trying to do initially was to raise some grant money to be able to get this off the ground. And there's a big learning there, which was that, again, lots of the funders said, this is interesting. We think it's necessary. We're not sure it's going to be possible. And, you need to show some track record before we might ever kind of give you any significant amounts of money. So in the end, I kind of said, okay, well, I'm going to try and make this happen for at least 1 year to try and demonstrate that track record. I'm going to try and run one full program. And I kind of made a deal with myself that I was in a very lucky situation where I could afford not to pay myself for 1 year. But I also said, I can't do more than that. So, but 1 year is okay. So I did that deal with myself. And then it was really came down to needing to make this program happen. And maybe I need to explain briefly in outline what the program is. But it's a 1 year full-time program upon which people with an average of 6 to 10 years work experience can change careers into kind of what we would call a purpose-driven career, where they're trying to help, in the language we use these days, help transform the economy. And that requires, we think, a kind of more intelligent integration of social, commercial, and environmental ways of working. And one of the key things, we can come back to the other parts of the program, but one of the key parts of the program is that we place them in 2 different organizations for 6 months each during the year, where they are doing paid work for those organizations. So this posed a bit of a problem when I was trying to set up the program, is that, I didn't make it easy for myself. I had to generate both sides of that equation, both the people who wanted to take a punt on the program and take quite a big risk with their careers, and the organizations who I was asking to, take a bit of a punt on the people. I was telling you, I'm going to be able to have amazing people on this program who I'll be able to give you. You will be able to pay them a salary, but a reduced salary because they're part of this program, and they're going to deliver great value for you. And that wasn't easy. And a few different things happened. We started with a very small first cohort, 5 people. I kind of set myself the target for 6. Didn't quite get there, but reckoned 5 would still work. I remember having to delay the start by 3 months at the moment just to get the last couple of organizations on board as well. Interestingly, even for that very first program, we had a big number of applications. I can't remember exactly, but it was over 100. From which we then selected 5 people, which obviously points to being able to select high caliber people who are going to be on the program. And in the early days, the difficult thing is then always actually persuading the organizations that they want to take part in the organization, that they will pay a salary to these people, which is at a London living wage level. So it's a relatively low salary, but nevertheless a significant commitment. And that they would then pay us a fee as well to OnPurpose for finding these people, training them during the year, etc. So we had to employ quite a lot of different strategies. I guess I was lucky that maybe my track record and having been through a similar career change provided me with some credibility vis-a-vis the people coming onto the program. I could also kind of say, we would have a bunch of people signed up, a bunch of organizations signed up who will be providing training to the program. That also added to the credibility. And on the flip side, for the organizations, one, trick that I employed, or not trick, but one way to give them some comfort was to go around finding people who were interested in the program, who were thinking about applying, and asking their permission as to whether I could share their CVs with the organizations that we were trying to bring on board. Not to say these are people who are going to be on the program, but this is an example of the type of person who is interested. And I found that making it kind of more tangible in those ways often unlocked more interest in the organizations, especially. So there was a series of bits and pieces that I learned along the way that we had to employ to try and make that market, I suppose, what we're creating, make that work.
So Tom, I'm keen to understand the organizations, whether there's any trends in the organizations that took interest for Cohort 1, whether it's specific sectors or size of organization.
Good question, and bear in mind there are only 5 of them in the first cohort, so it wasn't a huge sample size. I think there was a variety of motivations, and in 1 or 2 cases, it was definitely organizations that I had a connection with, or often actually not organizations, it was people within organizations that I had a connection with. So in one example, I remember O2 came on board, and there was a senior manager there who I had worked with at Red, and come in contact with through that. So, he was aware of me. I guess he trusted me, and he was up for kind of being part of that. So that that was one scenario where it worked out. I think there were other organizations who came on board because they thought it was going to be a good deal, and I think it was a good deal. It'd be a good way to bring in kind of high caliber talent in a flexible way. And then there was also some who more explicitly joined, knowing that this was hopefully going to be good for them, but they actually also wanted actively to contribute to the development of the social enterprise space. And they saw this maybe as part of their wider mission, that they were contributing to the overall pipeline of people coming into. In those days, we identified quite strongly with the social enterprise movement that they were contributing to bringing talent into that movement. And HCT Group, a large and well-known social enterprise, sadly doesn't exist anymore in the UK, but in those days was a large and well-known social enterprise, was very much of that persuasion. I think they knew and hoped it would be valuable to them, but they were definitely also doing it with a view to supporting the overall talent development in the space. And that, of course, was ideal for us in the end as well.
Okay, so from those 5 organizations and 5 associates that were part of Cohort 1, what has the trajectory been like since then?
Yeah, so I ran that in the first year with 5 people. I think the second year was 11, so we doubled. Then not long afterwards, we started running the program twice a year, so every 6 months rather than kind of just doing it once a year. And we were aiming to get cohorts of kind of 18 to 20 twice a year in London, which happened, relatively quickly. I'm guessing now, but let's say 2013, 14, we were probably kind of at those kind of numbers. And building up a team internally at the same time. By that time we were maybe, we kind of went from 1 to 2 to 3, at this point probably 4 people and so on, delivering this program. We then actually expanded to Paris in 2015 and replicated the program there, which was actually not necessarily what had initially been on the plan. So I'd always assumed that we would expand to more cities, and I'd always assumed that would probably happen within the UK first. So the thought was, maybe we'd go to Glasgow or Manchester, or hadn't necessarily identified where exactly would be, but that was the idea. And the way that Paris actually came about was that we had one of our alumni who'd been through our London program, and was great, and an amazing person and a strong professional as well. And she said, she'd registered quite early on her interest in wanting to start up OnPurpose somewhere else. And then after a while, it transpired that she was actually moving to Paris. And so the idea was, well, could we start it up in Paris? And initially I thought, well, hang on, that's not really what I had in mind. But, it doesn't take much thinking to kind of to go, well, actually, that sounds pretty exciting. And running it in London and Paris, if we can make that happen, it is really good. Interestingly, actually, although it was somewhat by coincidence or because of this person's personal circumstances, but there were quite a lot of things that made Paris actually a very suitable city. Like London, it's big. Like London or like the UK, France is quite centralized. So there is a big critical mass of organizations and people in Paris that we could dip into to kind of, again, make the two sides of our programs happen. 1 year after Paris, we then also expanded to Berlin, which again was sooner than I had anticipated. I was approached by someone from Germany who found out about our program in London, had kind of gone, there's nothing like this in Germany. I would love to make something like this happen in Germany. Long story short, I kind of said, well, we've not even launched in Paris yet. This is way too early. But he was able to persuade me in the end. And yeah, only about a year after Paris, we then launched in Berlin as well. And that's still the three cities that we operate in today: London, Paris, and Berlin.
And in terms of numbers, where are you that are kind of going through the program each year?
We have about 100 to 120 people go through the program every year. So in each of those three cities, we have 2 programs a year, and we aim for 18 to 20 people per program. And so cumulatively now, since the start, in fact, 2025, we'll be celebrating that we'll have had our 1,000th person complete the program, which will be a big milestone for us. And in some ways, if you compare to maybe virtual programs or tech-enabled programs or part-time programs or whatever, those are relatively small numbers. However, given that this is a 1-year full-time intervention in someone's life, it's a pretty deep impact that we aim to have. We're very pleased and very proud that we'll be hitting that milestone coming up.
Yeah, I mean, this is 1,000 people that you mentioned with 6 to 10 years experience, so likely have taken a pay cut to make this transition, right? That's huge. And I think before we get on to talking about maybe where some of those alumni have gone on and what they've gone on to do, I'm interested to see, apart from the 2 placements that they do in the year, there's also the training element. And you mentioned from the very start there were organizations that came in that were willing to do training. I'd be keen to see over the last 10 years how the training needs of the associates have evolved and what you see now are the key kind of training and capacity building elements that you focus on.
Yeah, sure. So maybe I'll give you just a quick thumbnail of the overall structure of the program to understand how that works. So as I mentioned, people come onto the program, they apply. It's quite competitive. So in London, for example, about 10% of people who apply to the program will get in. They then quit their job and they come to us full-time for a year, and we put them in 2 6-month placements, as mentioned, in a very wide range of organizations, from small charities to big corporates. But the common factor is that the work they're doing is always integrating social and commercial or environmental and commercial ways of working. That's the first element. The second is that every Friday afternoon we have training, and that's face-to-face. So in some ways you might say quite old school, but also incredibly valuable. And we have a range of people and organizations who will come in and provide training on certain topics. So it's very applied. You're learning from practitioners. It's not kind of academic. It's real life, learning from real life people doing this out in the real world. The third and fourth elements is that every associate, as we call the participants, is matched with an individual mentor and an individual coach as well, to help them, in the mentor case, really make as much impact and add as much value as possible to their placements. And for the coach, a lot of it is, of course, about the fact that these people are going through a significant career change, and there's some help in thinking that through. What do I really want to do? What are my strengths? Where do I want to end up? What is the kind of impact and the kind of purpose that I want to develop in my career is incredibly valuable. And the last element I'd say is that, not to be underestimated at all. In fact, I think this is one of the biggest things, is that you are doing this with a cohort of people. So, you'll be a part of a group of 20 who are going through this experience. And it is quite a big experience and quite a roller coaster at times as well, together. And that element of being able to learn together, to develop together, to go through this experience together is incredibly powerful and incredibly bonding as well, actually. So you are setting up a network, not just for the program, but actually for life. And that network, or community as we call it, extends not just to your own cohort, but actually to the cohorts above and below you, to the whole alumni. And in fact, we include all the people who help us make the program happen: the trainers, the mentors, the coaches, and the organizations, in that wider community. I should maybe also say, just also as a note of thanks, that our trainers, coaches, and mentors are also drawn from our network and work for us on a pro bono basis, which is incredible, and without which the business model wouldn't work. And I'll maybe come back to the business model later if that's of interest, and how that works and how we make ourselves financially sustainable. Now, how things have changed in terms of the curriculum, which, apologies, is what you actually asked for, I'm getting to a little bit late, is that in the early days, as I say, we were very much we were talking about, we are developing leaders for social enterprise. We're developing leaders who are bilingual, who can straddle that divide between social and commercial. Over time, and especially in the last 3, 4, 5 years, we have been moving more and more towards, how do we make the kind of change happen in our economy that we think is needed? And we believe that we need to have a transformation in our economy. Incremental change within the current system is no longer enough, is not going to achieve the kind of future that we need, that we want to be sustainable, regenerative, insert any word that you like to use at this point. But if we're really going to make a future that works for all of us, we need some pretty fundamental and some pretty transformational change. So in recent years, we have been upping the kind of topics around how do we understand and work in complexity? How do we acknowledge that the world is complex, and that, the solutions we need to try and find need to be adapted to that? How do we make systemic change happen? How do we think about that change that needs to happen, that transformational change that needs to happen in individuals, in ourselves during the program? That's what we hope to help people do on the program, to go through a transformational experience. How can those individuals then make transformational change happen in organizations? And by implication, we hope that, when enough organizations have gone through this type of transformational change, we will collectively reach a tipping point. And that's when the economy, the wider system, will tip over into the type of future that we want and need to create as well.
So, Tom, you talk about the curriculum that's evolving and the transformational change that needs to happen, and for alumni to take into organizations. So what exactly do you mean by that?
Yeah, thanks. That's a very good question, and one I could talk about for a long time. But essentially, transformational change for us is about change that involves reevaluating, reshaping your kind of beliefs and your understanding and your assumptions about how the world works in general, maybe how organizations work, maybe even how individual humans work. And we think that what we need to do is transition into a place where we understand that, the world is a complex system, and the majority of the world manages to operate in what we will call healthy ways. So, the majority of systems out there in the world, natural systems, trees, woods, ecosystems, etc., they have evolved over millions and billions of years to be healthy. And we can now actually, interestingly, describe quite accurately what those kind of healthy behaviors are. What's then also fascinating is that some of the few systems that don't behave in these healthy ways are, interestingly, our economy as a whole, and many of the organizations within it, and arguably to some extent how we behave as individuals as well. And this is actually where I sometimes draw upon, as a way of kind of trying to explain to people what we mean by that, draw a little bit upon my original background in cancer research, and say that, shocking though it in a way seems, but there are a huge number of parallels that you can draw between how cancer operates in our human bodies and how the economy works at the moment, within the natural world or within our planet. And that might at first seem a little bit frivolous, or why are you drawing that analogy? But actually, there is some sense behind it, in the sense that our human bodies are complex systems, in the same way that our economy and the natural world is a complex system as well. And so, being able to understand how, if you can draw parallels between how something that is destructive and that we don't want to have happen, like cancer in our bodies, is working, and we can see that that seems to be going on in the economy, that in some ways can teach us, you know, what we don't want to be happening. And we can learn from that. And it also helps us cast that in a different light and see it in a different way, and hopefully helps us, in a way, maybe shock us out a little bit of our normal ways of thinking and opens us up to thinking in different ways. Just to give you a couple of examples, and these are just the most obvious ones, but cancers try and maximize their growth. They try and grow as much as they possibly can at the expense of their environment, at the expense of using resources from other parts of the bodies that the rest of the body might normally need, etc. That is, very similar to what organizations do in our economy. We explicitly try and maximize the growth of organizations. We even try and maximize the growth of our economies. We talk about GDP and getting GDP growing again, et cetera, et cetera. And so by trying to make parallels between what we've become very used to thinking of as being, inverted commas, normal in economics or in management terms, and something which we are very used to realizing is not very good in medical terms, I'm trying to help people understand that there are other ways of seeing our economy. And what if we actually, rather than behaving in ways that shows lots of parallels to how cancerous cells work in our body, what if we behaved in lots of ways that were akin to and aligned with how we actually know healthy systems out there in nature and in other places actually work? So what does it take to manage an organization in a healthy way, in such a way that if all organizations were to be managed and be run and led in that kind of way, would then add up to an economy that in turn was healthy, regenerative, sustainable, all those words that we use to describe where we want to get to.
Tom, this is such a fascinating topic, and I guess this is where OnPurpose is evolving with the curriculum that you have, and also the way that you are building leaders to transform the economy, not just in the UK, but also overseas. And it would be great to see this now in practice. If you have a case study that you can share of an alumni that has gone on to do some amazing work, either starting their own, businesses where they combine social or commercial, or going into a large organization and transforming within.
Yeah, and there are lots and lots of case studies
many,
of our alumni who've gone off and done it. And the wonderful thing, but also the difficult thing, is that they go off and do so many different things. And ultimately, I suppose, for me, because people often say, well, what should I go and do? And I say, well, actually, I don't really mind what you go and do. What I hope you will go and do is work somewhere in an organization, and whatever change you're trying to make happen, I hope the change is rooted in this different way of understanding the world, and these different values, these different beliefs and assumptions about what is good and what is healthy. But to give you a couple of specific examples, it ranges from, for example, Jawad, who is a community organizer in London, in a very local scale, but I think very powerful, very impactful work of how do you help communities help themselves, through to people who work in what we might consider to be quite classic social enterprises. So Ruth is the MD of Divine Chocolate, which at least in the UK, and I think maybe also in the US these days, is quite a well-known brand. She's one of our fellows. Through to then people, we're quite a few people in impact investing. The co-CEO of the Impact Investing Institute in the UK is a fellow of ours. Through to people who working in big corporates, and John, who was actually until recently, I believe, a VP at Interface, a big corporate tire manufacturer, very well known in the regeneration space for being very innovative. And he, was working across Europe and the Middle East and North Africa for them, and has now, I think, recently gone to Lego and working on plastics there. So a very wide range of people doing all kinds of different exciting things. And as I say, for me, what I hope the commonality between all of them is that they are rooting what they're doing, and especially rooting the change they're trying to bring about in a different set of values, where we are not trying to replicate that cancerous behavior of maximizing growth, maximizing profits, making the system work for ourselves. But instead, we are actually trying to think about, well, what is needed for this whole system, the organization I'm part of, and the wider economy as well, actually, to be healthy, and what's needed for that.
I guess with so many alumni and doing so many different things, it's kind of hard. It must be hard for you and the team to track this and to see all of the directions that they're taking. But this is, huge impact. How do you visualize and see all of these moving pieces for the alumni that go on, and of course all the things they do after the program?
With difficulty, if I'm honest. And of course, we conduct surveys. We ask people where they're working. Are they anticipating that they'll still be working in purpose-driven careers in 5 years' time? We do all of that stuff. But it's not easy, and especially because they're in such a diverse set of organizations doing such diverse things, trying to aggregate that, or trying to aggregate anything that is beyond a kind of self-assessment is quite difficult. But, we also try and tell the stories, and that I think can be very powerful. And that is also something that I'm convinced is something we need to do, is to tell the stories of people who are successful and fulfilled and exciting and inspiring in this different way of thinking, so that people start understanding that what I'm aiming for should not just be to go into the city and make a lot of money or whatever, but actually this is what an exciting career and an inspiring and fulfilling and purposeful career looks like. So telling those stories is also incredibly powerful. And then even, internally, it can come down to some quite small things. I love walking into our Paris office, for example, where on the wall, they literally have their, whatever it is now, 200 or 300 alumni, and there's a picture of each of them, which 2 organizations they worked in during the program, where they are now, what they're doing, and seeing that kind of diversity and richness and amazing, breadth of things that people are doing is fascinating. So internally, that's a way that for example, we keep track of things as well.
Tom, if there are individuals that are listening to the show right now, or leaders in organizations that are listening to this and thinking, how can I get involved with OnPurpose, either by hiring or joining the program as an associate, what are the upcoming opportunities for both organizations and individuals next year?
Yeah, we're always looking for both of those, because in each of our 3 cities, we're twice a year running a program. So we're always looking for, the next 20 amazing people to join and the next 20 organizations to work with as well. If you're thinking of joining the program as a participant, head over to onpurpose.org, and either in London, Paris, or Berlin, there's quite an obvious link where you can register your interest. You can put in your email address, and you will either be taken straight through to the application form, or when it's the appropriate time, you'll be reminded to do that. So that's available all the time. Please, and very easy to do. Please just do that, and that can be the start of an amazing journey for you. On the organizational front, please get in touch. Again, you can do it through the website. You can do it on LinkedIn through either our organizational LinkedIn accounts, or feel free to drop me a line as well. Or you can look up on the website, our teams, and it's fairly obvious there which team member deals specifically in which city with the organizations. But, just get in touch in any which way, and we'll direct you to the right person. And we'd love to hear from you. If you're after finding great talent at below market rates, and an incredible kind of community to be part of, and a hive mind to be part of, that is trying to create, make this really big and important change happen, please don't hesitate to be in touch.
Yeah, fantastic. We'll make sure to put all of the links in the show notes as well, to Tom, your LinkedIn account, email addresses, websites, and everything else that might be needed. Tom, this has been such an amazing chat, and I think this is one of the reasons I started the podcast. There's a question I ask to all of my guests for the last 55 episodes at the end of every episode, and this is, if you had your own social impact journal, and that you could write a page in this book for someone to read. And each episode, I change the question. So for this episode, if you can write a page in that book for the associates that are joining the program on day one, what would you want them to read?
Oh, that's a difficult one. I think I'd want them to know that, the really big change that we need to make happen can sometimes feel scary, sometimes maybe feel impossible. Actually, it really can happen. And the place and the way that it happens is with the individuals. So by them just turning up to this program and acknowledging that they want to change and they want to be part of making the wider change happen, that's an incredible first step to be making. And the only way that we're going to change this is by us all making that first step and stepping up to the plate, if you like. And that, even though it might feel difficult and concerning sometimes, actually by doing it together, it can also be fun, it can also be inspiring, and it will be. And ultimately, we will end up, if we do this right, we will end up in a world as well, which is better, which is more fun, and which is, where we all want to be. So they've done the first big, difficult decision. There's going to be lots more to come, but there's lots of people to do it with, and it's not as difficult as you might think.
Tom, thanks so much for being on the show.
Thanks, Jack, a lot for having me. And thanks as well for what you do with this podcast, which is amazing.